this. All right, so all serious. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the ICCAWebinars. And my name is Sean Chen, and I'm with ICCAT, and I am turning the mic to our moderator, Xenia.
Thank you so much, Sean, and welcome for everybody, especially to my dear speakers who have already been about 9 hours ago doing this show once already for an audience. So thank you for joining me and persevering. This is a continuation of a session, or actually 2 sessions, which we had at the ICCA Congress in Porto. Subsequently, we designed a white paper, and Tara is going to pop a link to the white paper in the chat for you, for all of those who have not seen it yet. It is a white paper done by the World PCO Alliance in collaboration with ICCA, talking about reimagining a RFP process, which we all came to a conclusion is pretty antiquated. So before we get started, obviously a quick round of introductions. And while we are introducing ourselves, Sean is going to launch our first poll. So we also hear and understand who is in the audience with us today. So please let us know what organization you represent. And over to Erika to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Kowalczyk. I am the Director of Global Events here at the International Society for Stem Cell Research. Sorry, I was going to say the acronym because I'm so used to doing that. Happy to be here.
And Erika, if you can just get us started also with what is your biggest challenge when it comes to current RFP processes?
My biggest challenge is, I think something I mentioned before, but a little different, is maybe not sometimes always getting all the information I need from the RFP proposal that I requested in the original request.
Perfect, thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Hi, everybody. Tom Reiser. I'm Partner Association Advisory at Gaining Edge. I'm representing the association side here in this discussion. It's a pleasure to be here and great to see all of you. The greatest challenge around the RFP process is to keep the board aligned on making a decision based on agreed decision criteria and not just voting with their gut.
Ooh, that's a tough one, but we'll get to that in a second. Magda, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Magdalena Holowinska, representing Grupa MTP, that's operating Congress and exhibition venues in Poznań. And we are operating on a daily basis with Poznań Convention Bureau in attracting associations to our city. My biggest challenge is when the RFP is not actually detailed enough and we do not get proper feedback along the bidding process.
And we already see a gap between the two sides of the story, so we'll dive right back into it. But first, Sean, can you let us see what the poll showed for the first one? So we have primarily destinations and venues here, and we do have association side. And I assume that's more on our speaker side. Thank you. And Sean, can you launch the second poll while we go over to Tara?
Hi, everyone. Tara Miller, Director of Global Sales at Destination DC, which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Washington, DC. So like many of you on the call, we work on attracting international congresses and association meetings to our destination. My biggest pet peeve, I would say, is when the stated decision criteria, similar to Tom, but when the stated decision criteria isn't actually what determines the decision. And so when those emotional or other gut factors come into the decision.
Oh, I see. We'll have quite an interesting discussion here. And last but not least, Stephanie.
Hello, everybody. Like Magda, I would say one of my challenges is, oh, I should introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Johnson from the Vancouver Convention Center. And my role here is to keep track of long-term opportunities and then engage with our sort of local host community once we get those. So we work closely with the Bureau on the whole bidding process. And like Magda, from the venues perspective, I would say that we struggle with RFPs that aren't quite detailed enough. Even something as simple as an accurate sort of day by day meeting space requirement grid. So I'll start there, but I'm sure we'll get into some discussions in more detail.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm Ksenija Polla from the Talley Management Group. We are an AMC/PCO. And my biggest challenge is really the fact that PCOs are brought in towards the end as a pure supplier, rather than at the beginning stages of bidding and bridging that gap between the understanding of associations and the destinations and all the different stakeholders. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to dive into those conversations. And Sean, if you just take us quickly to our next slide and give us the poll questions. So what do we have as the biggest challenge is lack of professionalism of the RFP, too long or short, and too much focus on price over value. And I think my fellow panelists will agree that's definitely what we'll be covering. Thank you so much, Sean. And just a couple of highlights where we want to go. I'll give a few highlights from the white paper itself, but what we want to do in this session is really go beyond it. So what are some of those questions which we need to ask to clarify the RFP? What are some of those best practices where we can bridge some of that gap in misunderstanding? Also, one of the key elements which we'll touch on is where recognize what kind of financial support and value can be brought from the different areas. It doesn't necessarily always need to be financial support. And then hopefully we'll all leave with some practical changes that each of us can start testing. And we are going to some key highlights from our white paper. The key highlights for us were just 5 we want to share. One was that alignment of mission and the event goals. And we'll touch on that very specifically immediately in our conversations. So how can the mission of an association be really reproduced in the event goals itself? So what are some of the values beyond the logistics and costs? How can we design jointly better attendee experiences? Then we also touched in the white paper on a new request for qualification phase, which is much shorter and allows for different stakeholders, which are usually not on the radar, smaller destinations, unusual destinations and venues, to be in the mix, and also for associations to highlight much more transparently what are some of those qualification criteria which are must-have versus a nice-to-have, and where they are flexible in discussing it. And then finally, one of the key areas which the white paper touches is how can we share the risk and the responsibilities in creating that value and partner much better as partners, as real partners, towards creating better experiences for the benefit of our attendees. Because in the end, the better we work together, the better we all go hand in hand. That meeting for the association will indeed become the one must-attend event for their attendees. So now we want to move a step further and discuss in our conversations what do we need to change in our current process to become a little bit more mission and goal aligned, much more efficient and transparent, and partnership driven. So all of what we've touched in the white paper, we want to now also touch in the conversation. And we are moving straight into our first conversation together with Erika and Tom. And Sean, you can stop sharing. Thank you. Our first question to Erika and Tom, we can start with you this time. When an association begins an RFP process, how clear are the board, the staff, the meeting planner, the leadership about what the event must achieve and what will ultimately drive the decision for a destination?
Yeah, I think it's a super important question. Unfortunately, one that is not really asked or not really examined regularly. I think we all think we know what it is that we want to achieve, and it's part of our life cycle of an association. So we go about it at a certain time of the year, typically. However, I think it is one of those strategic areas and processes that associations are not regularly revisiting. And therefore, there might be actually a misalignment between the evolution of the strategic evolution of an organization and ultimately whether the RFP process and how we're gonna make the decision, what we're gonna be looking for, that doesn't necessarily align. So I think there's a huge opportunity for associations to be much more intentional about this and really think about literally year after year, are we still asking the right questions? Are we still making the decisions on the right factors? And I'm really not convinced that this is done regularly.
Erika, would you agree? And do you have anything else to add?
I would agree. I think, from my perspective, the board has their own ideas of what is the process, and maybe that's part of the problem too, is that we're not informing them enough, or I'm not informing them enough of what that process is, so they feel better educated, and ultimately, hopefully, not going with their gut. In making the decision, but looking at more at a investment in partnership. That definitely is one of those struggles. I said this before, but it's one of those things where I think the meeting planner is kind of stuck in the middle, trying to make sure that you're capturing all the perspectives of all the different players. And so that being our job to then be able to educate those folks to make sure that they are. And I think, that is definitely one of those takeaways I got, especially when working on this white paper.
And what you mentioned in the earlier session today, I really like that part of how can the meeting planners get a seat at the table and become those event strategists, being in the room with the board, and not only relying always on the translation of what the board wants and also what you can convey. We all know the movie Lost in Translation sometimes, and everybody understands things differently. So, Erika, when you look, yeah.
Sorry, can I just also add? I think one thing that we sometimes forget as professional staff, our board is turning over, right? And you might have had alignment at a previous board discussion around this, but now a third of the board or half of the board is new, and bringing them really on the journey with them, reminding them of what it is that we're trying to do. Otherwise, you're jumping right in, assuming that everybody, talks about the same thing and is aligned. That's not necessarily the case. Exactly,
and there is usually always turnover, and maybe it even needs to be part of some kind of onboarding process for all new board members to sit down literally and understand. So when you're looking at the RFP process, what would you envisage as important and critical, Erika, to really protect through that process?
Definitely the integrity of the meeting and what the program is, and making sure that you're capturing what the attendee experience is, as our job is to make sure that we are bringing them as a community together and allowing them to have that networking, that education. And so keeping that together and making sure it's a place for them, and without worrying about the finances. I mean, you do, but I mean, when you're trying to focus on what's critical for your members or your delegates who are attending the meeting.
And Erika, I know we'll touch on it later on as well, but because we do have a larger number of destinations and centers, venues in this room now, maybe another follow-up question for you. Do you actually convey this as part of your RFP? What is the integrity of your meeting? Do you convey that very clearly?
Yes, we do put that in there, but one of the things I've learned and trying to do more and more is to keep improving upon it of the RFP and making sure I am more clear. I mean, I have to say, having this webinar and the one earlier and the discussions has really, and also the white paper itself has really caused me to really rethink. Even though I think I have a pretty good one, there's always room for improvement, and keep adding to that. One of the things that we've discussed before is transparency and being clear and having as much information that is focused and to the point. I think not to go belaboring on in so many different things, but trying to provide as much information to help the RFP process.
That's really great to hear. Thank you for that, Erika. Tom, you talked about that already. How can we make sure that we are very clear and aligned between the actual priorities and what we want to achieve, and then suddenly the decision making wears off? Where do you see that critical point where they suddenly go off?
Yeah, it's actually often, in my opinion, the actual decision-making process. I think many organizations have, and they have to a degree, a matrix of these are the factors that we're looking at. Maybe they have how they're weighed in terms of the decision-making process. Yet often there is at the end, there's a vote, right? So you might actually fill in the matrix and you come out with a decision, maybe. But then there's a vote, and often it is actually a secret vote, and then people vote much more with maybe their instinct, their gut, where they would like to go, rather than a very rational, review of what is really the pros and cons of each venue based on the matrix, based on the weighing. So I think there's a great opportunity for associations to make this a much more objective process. You need to bring the board along. It's a process, but nevertheless, I think ultimately you're going to have a much better outcome. I love what Erika said, and she's one of those great examples of an organization that already has a good RFP process, but constantly wants to improve. That's not necessarily the case often. Ksenija, you are working with a lot of associations on the association management on the PCO side as well. What is the dynamic actually as a PCO in that space?
So we basically have those both hats on. We are on the supplier and logistics and organizational side, but then also we understand from the associations, we advise boards, we do strategy sessions. And I think you are hitting the nail on the head there. We try to be diplomatic because obviously in the end of the day, those associations we manage, they are our bread and butter. So you don't want to upset all of those volunteer leaders. But sometimes you have to do gentle firmness and almost bring them on that journey so they understand that the bigger picture of what their role as a volunteer and a board is, that it's not just a personal role, but it is for the better of the society. So really drilling in on that mission the association is for. So I think that it's a little bit of a tightrope play, but I think there is a lot of that education we can do in that respect, respectfully, of course, to get people to actually come on that journey with you.
Yeah.
And look, Stephanie,
sorry, just one more thing, very quick. That is, we talk often as organizations that have professional staff or have a PCO, but we are also cognizant, of course, there are many organizations out there where the volunteer leadership basically almost does everything. And being able to get to them and actually helping them would be really kind of like the holy grail.
And that is actually, I think, almost a role of all of us, regardless of what kind of role we have, whether it's the venue, whether it's the PCO, whether it's the destination. We can all contribute and talk with them in that way to position ourselves as partners, because in the end of the day, we want to make their events successful and their association shine and contribute to our communities. Stephanie, when the final decision goes a little bit off from what you were expecting and the published criteria, what is the most helpful for you in that instance? You are on mute.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I think that we don't always expect to win. So although we think that we've put towards the association an offer that we hope are going to meet their criteria at the very best, we've done what we can. But what's really hard is when we get declined with no rationale or maybe something very vague. It's much more helpful to get specific feedback.
Oh, you went on mute again?
There we go. It's difficult, especially when we've worked hard with our national society or our local conference ambassadors to put all of that work in and then not to get feedback. It can be much worse. So, usually we're disappointed, and I can understand how the decision makers may think it would hurt our feelings to give us specific feedback, but it's much better actually to get the feedback. It's like if you were ghosted in a relationship, you would rather have a rationale from someone than to just have somebody disappear. So it only helps us improve for next time, and certainly it kind of takes the sting out of losing when we get the specific feedback.
And it actually helps you decide, can you do and bid for it again? And does it make any sense to bid for it again? And Tara, you have experience in that respect as well.
Just similar. The only thing I would add is, and don't wait for the feedback to be just once the decision was made. A lot of these are bidding processes with potentially shortlists. And so encouraging the associations to give feedback throughout the process. And so if initial bid is first submitted, there was an instance where once everything is submitted and the association can review everything as close to apples as possible, giving feedback to the bids about where there are gaps in case they can be addressed. Sometimes if it's a full global rotation, it's open to anywhere, you quickly find out, oh, we got a bid from this region and we haven't been, and we're really keen to go there. And so if we get that feedback, then that helps us, prioritize or make sure we're pursuing other opportunities if we're not that preferred region, and then counter if we can address something and strengthen our proposal or put forward information that has now become a priority, because we also realize, all of us, that some of these bid processes take not only months, but they could be a year or more. And so criteria, the world changes. And so if we have an opportunity to all hear that and be able to potentially address it, that helps everyone be successful.
So yeah, just to summarize what we were chatting about, the RFP process can be improved way before we even start writing it. So being really clear on what we want to achieve as an association through our mission and where the event is aligning with that. Agree what's really critical for us, how the decision is made, and communicate this internally, of course, before you actually go out to the public. And I have to quickly see what Tom is saying in the chat. Okay, I'll let people answer that, and we can move on to our next conversation, which we very controversially called Can Meetings Be Bought? And question to Tara. Financial support means a lot to a lot of associations. At what point do you think it supports a better event, and at what point does it begin to actually distort the whole decision-making process for you as a destination?
Yeah, this is very, very hot topic. I think there's sensitivity because as a community, we're seeing a lot of RFPs kind of lead with expecting funding or what will you give me financially. And so I think one really important thing is for associations to be clear about expectations and the weighted importance of that, whether it is true cash and how important that is, or if there are other areas that are important for support, whether that's, in kind, which can show up in different ways of discounts and in-kind support with site visits, or if it's things like connections and expertise and helping enhance that overall experience for the delegates. So I think one, knowing that each model in destinations is different. Where does that money come from? In some cities, whether it's a city, a state, a province, a country, there are different funders and the money is coming from different sources. So for example, in North America, a lot of times our funding on the bureau side is coming from a hotel bedroom tax or an occupancy tax. So a lot of times when we're looking at an RFP, we ask, well, what are your bedroom commitments? And not just what you're going to contract, but what has been actualized and picked up in other destinations, because that is how we're able to do forecasting for funding and expecting economic impact, because that's kind of the levy of where it comes from. But in other countries, that could purely be government funding that's coming from initiatives like industry sector development, business attraction and talent attraction and university research funding. And so understanding where the sources of money are coming from, I think is really important from destinations. And the other point that we've been talking about is when you do look on paper, the level that destinations or a bid is coming in, whoever those partners are, a lot of times that amount is actually becoming recognized as a headline, platinum, whatever level that is of sponsorship, if you look at the association prospectus. And so understanding that, just like associations do for their sponsors and exhibitors and partners, is what are those deliverables and what are those metrics that a destination can go back to show ROI, which is getting into not only the economics, but then the social and legacy impact initiatives, the environmental initiatives. What are some of those other key factors that as the premier sponsor, we can go back to our stakeholders and tell that story of the why.
And that's going a little bit to what Stephanie said at the very beginning as well. Erika, how do you look at it from the association perspective?
We definitely look at for the funding support, but we also look at it for the help to find where we can maybe apply for grant or funding support that's outside of the bureau or the city. You as the city, as the bureau, they know the city best, they know the sort of resources that are available, and so having that help to find, hey, there's this group that's providing grants for associations that are scientific, that'd be great. Those are those information that we always appreciate. And to Tara's point, we've been doing that with some of the bureaus and cities of having them be our sponsors. Happy to recognize them because they are a good partner for us and helping to provide the meeting for our attendees in whatever region we're in. So it's really been a good balance between the two.
And we have a great question in the chat, which talks about the fact, is it off-putting for associations to have too many rules around what funding from destinations can be used towards?
That's not one I'm aware of. I don't think we have any limits on what those funding grant is, as far as I know right now. That there's nothing that we would stop us from pursuing it.
I would say as a
the audience, go ahead. Tara?
Oh yeah, Tara, go ahead.
No, Tom, continue.
From an association side, I would say it kind of depends what Erika said. If you just have different channels of funding that you have to go after grant requests, that's one thing. It is more when a particular destination has a bunch of funding flows, but then they're very, very specific. You can only use this for promotion. You can only use this for early career. You can only use this for that and the other thing. As long as they're generally aligned with what the organization wants to do, and in most cases it is, it's fine. But when it becomes too complicated, it is actually quite challenging and also quite bureaucratic to actually do this. And let's be honest, many organizations will find ways to basically just kind of like mold things in a way that it ultimately meets the requirements. I'm not sure that's really the purpose of all of this.
And I saw
the only thing I was going to add is from the destination perspective, I feel like some destinations are being very transparent and posting, there was subvention criteria. They give this much per delegate as long as you're, an international delegate and whoever that's qualified. So it's been interesting destination to destination to see some of those very posted transparent versus somewhere like our city, because the funds are coming from different sources and there's a committee that reviews it. It's not something we can publicly post because it is very subjective, to be honest. And so it's an interesting thought of when we're talking about RFP practices. I think a lot of times we're also talking about subvention practices as destinations and what's the criteria and how can we be transparent about that.
I think
and I saw a lot of chatter in the, oh, sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing. I think this morning on our call, Tara, you mentioned that bureaus or cities kind of become one of the biggest funders of like a title sponsor, essentially, with the amounts that we're able to give to conferences. And just like a title sponsor, we often have to have ROI to go back to our sort of funding models on and explain this is what we were able to do. And generally, I think the reason that sometimes we ask for certain criteria or the money to go towards certain areas is so that we can go back to our stakeholders and explain, look at all the good things that happened out at the meeting, not just the fact that there were people in the city spending money, but also it helped our local academic institutions. It helped our healthcare system. We were able to bring in this many people from LMICs. So that type of an ROI or reporting mechanism or data, that's probably why there sometimes is criteria. And I understand that that's data that maybe sometimes hasn't been captured by an association, but it really does help us talk about meetings in a different way and the impact of meetings in a different way.
And this is actually a hugely educational aspect for associations to understand that this is going to be increasingly necessary to get funding for meetings. And I think there's opportunity for ICCA and other organizations to really educate associations around this, because if this funding opportunity dries up, it's going to be really problematic for associations. And we can all play, it's for all of us to participate and contribute to this.
I agree, but just let's remember that there are some destinations that cannot provide direct funding. And we can only provide some in-kind support, either public transport free of charge, which is also a cost for us as a destination. But there are certain rules that in the country, for example, like in Poland, public institutions cannot provide direct funding. It's really not seen well by the authorities. They are a bit afraid what would be the reaction of the citizens to that. But I agree, you really have to inform the association, and the destination has to be very clear what the money is for, actually, when we try to attract any scientific meeting to the destination.
And to Stephanie's point, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It can be also a Pandora's box. So we have to maybe be clear on what do we communicate externally and what do we communicate internally to our stakeholders who are providing the funds. So what kind of ROI are we expecting? And I think that deep level of conversation is probably where we want to be heading towards, and not just say, oh yes, we want to be a title sponsor. Erika, there was a lot of comments on the feedback to our first theme. I just want to, and a lot of people are not getting feedbacks from associations when they lose a bid. Is there something, is it just the way people are asking the question? Is there a simpler way to get feedback?
I think it was touched upon earlier today that it's not going to hurt your feelings if we provide that feedback. I think that was a great comment. I think Stephanie said it this morning. It was definitely one of those where I was just like, you know what, you're right. It wouldn't hurt your feelings. You're just trying to understand what wasn't the thing that worked for this bid. And so that one, I mean, I'm always open with having a conversation if they want to know more. In a recent bid, not for a venue, but for another vendor, it was very interesting. Some of them actually called me to say, we've got your bid, but do you have a few minutes to talk? Because having that discussion sometimes helps have a better understanding of what's needed. Some things that are kind of between the lines, it's not really clear maybe, or just because there's a story behind it. But even then afterwards, yeah, I'm open to always providing discussion, but I'm always kind of a little leery because I'm like, I want to hurt their feelings, because I really do enjoy the people I get to interact with. But at the same token, it is still, they have to report back to their superiors about what happened there. And what can we do?
Thank you for that.
So, yeah,
no, great tip. And while we were on the subvention and financial side still, for you as an association, that's also a balancing act to, how do you ensure the integrity of the experience you are delivering to your members? Right, Erika?
Sorry, I missed that.
So when we are talking about financial support, it's also a balancing act for you to responsibility towards your members that's any support is not clouding the experience you're delivering for your members.
Correct. Yeah, it's definitely a balance. Right now, I have a board that's very financially focused, and they're just going with that without looking at the bigger picture of things. Does the venue really work for what we need? Does it have every component? Well, maybe this one does. It does a better job with what's needed. So yeah, it's been tough, especially because anytime we're outside of the US, we really do rely a lot on the funding to help. But at the same token, I'm still trying to make sure that there is a good experience, not only for our board, our attendees, our members, our staff, because overall it's providing that ideal program for everyone.
Yeah, and Magdalena, you also mentioned that in our earlier session and in the prep call, how important it is to have those conversations early on, rather than start asking for concessions, discounts, because it creates tension and it affects the experience of the delegates and has a negative connotation on your venue, right?
Definitely, no, but I mean, we all understand budget constraints, but as I said, the sooner we know about them, the better we can react to them. And when we are talking about partnership, this is how I understand actually partnership, that we discuss openly from the early stages of event planning, where the concessions will happen and how to include them in the overall budget of the event. And as such, then we can really create a better event, because as you mentioned, we are all working for the same goal, just to make a successful meeting, both for the association, but also for the destination, because this is actually you as the organizers and your participants are becoming our ambassadors in the world. And as such, we want to provide the best experience possible. And when we are talking about the concessions, I also mentioned catering, which is actually the only service that is really visible for the participants that the concessions has been made. And this is what can actually reflect badly on the association, but also on us as a venue.
And we've already touched on this topic. We've just flowed into our next block, Stephanie. What information do venues need early on to provide an accurate, creative, but also commercially realistic proposal?
Yes, I think the most important thing is a realistic idea of when meeting rooms are needed. And this is, I think, quite detailed day to day. Give us an Excel spreadsheet of each meeting room that you need, which days of the week it's required, which rooms need move-in, which might not, including setup and, not just the number of people, but the type. Is it classroom style? Is it theater? Is it in rounds? So that really helps us easily block the space and see what options we might have in the calendar. Also, is it really specific to days of the week? Can it move a day forward or backward? And obviously things like which months could this be held in? Is it absolutely not flexible at all? This really helps us understand if we need to approach other business to shift it, if it's not booked already, or how we're going to prioritize our calendar. So the more specific RFPs can be in terms of the space, that really helps us. Additionally, sometimes we're being asked to put together a proposal from us as a city without that information, and it can lead to unrealistic expectations on venue rental. And every venue around the world is so different in how they're set up with their revenue streams, their suppliers, and the more information that can be in an RFP, the more it really helps us. I think sometimes with some of our clients in the past, there's been this idea that if they're fully transparent, we'll take advantage of them. If they tell us, oh, our F&B program is $1.5 million, or, we're going to use your vendors, then we'll get really greedy and try to take as much from them as we can. When in fact, I think the more transparent an RFP is on which suppliers you prefer to use, if you're going to use a local PCO, if your food and beverage program is quite large, et cetera, it actually helps us give you a more financially, I think, reasonable offer in terms of the venue rental itself, because we have a full picture of the business that will be coming in. And I think most of us that work in the international association business do it because we find it so personally rewarding, not just financially. We're not here just for the money. I think we'd probably be in a different industry if it was just for the money. At least in Canada, we would be. So I think we find it personally really motivating and rewarding. And depending on the business mix of each venue, sometimes we know we might just break even on an event, or sometimes even lose money. And that's okay, because we're doing it for sort of this bigger purpose, for the community, for the industry. So we may look at an event that does not have a lot of revenue streams and decide to put forward our very best offer. We may look at a different event that has a lot of potential revenue streams for the venue and be able to put together a very good offer, because we know that we'll maybe make it up with some of our other local business that's repeating, et cetera. So, I really think transparency when it comes to all of the different components that will take place in the city and the venue really helps a lot.
Thank you, Stephanie. Magdalena, do you want to add anything else to that?
Just one thing. I mean, because we are talking about the how we like the RFPs to be really detailed, but what we would also welcome is that they are not too restrictive, and there is some flexibility factor on the requirements, so that we can really cooperate together on planning the event, rather than just fulfilling the requirements, because as Stephanie said, every venue is different. What worked in one venue may not necessarily work in the other one. So it's good to be, when there is some openness and some dialogue in the designing stages of the event. Yeah.
Perfect. And that just really emphasizes what we already said in the white paper itself. have almost like a matrix, part of your RFP, where you are highlighting, these are my non-negotiables, this is where I'm flexible, whether it's dates, moving back or forth, or come up with a better understanding for the room layout.
Exactly.
Tara, you also mentioned when it comes to that flexibility and the added value of what actually a association meeting brings in, you were talking about the ICWs.
Yeah, so in a practical way is capturing and reporting on what we call ICWs, or in conjunction with meetings, events, affiliate programs, however they want to be named. But so it's not just presenting the RFP as just the association meeting itself, but what else is coming. And that could be, networking, educational events that your sponsors and exhibitors are. But what we're also seeing is when you have large groups of corporate, let's say, traveling to your meeting, they're deciding to do their own internal company meeting because everyone's together and everyone's working on culture building, and they're taking advantage of the time and cost savings of having everyone be there already. So then the question becomes, how can the association know about this and capture that information and include that in their RFP? So that can be something that we all champion and highlight some best practices. But I think some of the associations that have done this well, the easiest thing is it's a requirement. And Ksenija, you shared about ASAE as an example where they have any events happening around have to be registered, they have to be approved, they have restrictions on hotels and spaces immediately around when it's such a large conference that they have to agree and approve and report those into ASAE. Some meetings aren't that large and don't have all that space, so then it becomes what's in it for the exhibitor or the sponsor and partner. What's the perk for them to do that? So we've heard some associations say they get preferential choice when the official housing blocks open where they want to go, or they might get first option on space of where their exhibit goes. And so for associations to consider, how do we motivate, whether it's a communication strategy or a perk, to have our sponsors and exhibitors be giving us that information that we can then leverage to benefit the association meeting overall.
100%. And Tom and Erika, very quick, we keep on hearing that whole question of transparency. How difficult is it for associations to be this open? And is there anything which is making it difficult?
Erika, you want to get started? Oh, me. I think it's often more because we are in kind of this rhythm. We just do things the way we've always done it. I don't think that overall associations have really fully warmed up to this whole partnership approach. I think it is more like, oh, this is a negotiation. We're going to try to get as much money out of the destination or the venue as possible. So it almost feels a little bit like negotiating against yourself. And I think we just have to overall change that attitude, because and I think what Tara mentioned and others as well is, if we have to prove increasingly that we can be partners to ultimately unlock the most beneficial opportunities, then I think that's going to be the easiest way to get associations to open up.
I have to agree. Yeah, it's a mindset change that needs to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And let's go to our last block. We introduced in the white paper the question of doing a very short 2 to 3 page request for qualification. And that what resonated with quite a large number. Tara, from your perspective, what would you need as a destination to have specified in that RFQ, so you as a destination can determine, okay, this is valuable for me to follow up?
I think some of it is the basic, like what's the event about? What are you trying to achieve? Your delegate profile helps. So we're looking at overall, can we support and mutually be a fit for each other for both sides? One thing I will say is related to dates, and this was brought up already with some of the the venues with your date preferences, flexibility of the dates or months, patterns, all of that helps determine availability. But if availability is being requested as part of the RFQ, knowing that once availability is requested, it's triggering a business evaluation process in whether it's from the bureau or the venue, where now if we're looking at our availability and proposing dates, there have to be other boxes that are checked to make sure that booking parameters and qualifications are being met. So for example, in North America, US and Canada to somewhat, that's where this bedroom block becomes a thing. So I mentioned that just because I think the RFQ, depending on the regional rotation, will go back to business models as well and what's being asked as part of that process.
And Tom, from an association perspective, what would you need to get in terms of information and understand, okay, this is the pool of destinations I'm gonna invite to do a full RFP?
Yeah, I would say the most basic feasibility, right, is are there enough hotel rooms? Does the venue generally fit our requirements? What are the overall conditions in the destinations, whether that's regulatory, tax, and so on, to kind of know what are we walking into here, and can we do our meeting here? Once we have that, then in the next phase we can really make it more competitive between various destinations. But the first one is like, could we even do the business? Could we even do business here reasonably well?
Okay. And when we introduced that, the premise of an RFQ phase is just not to add another phase, because it does add another couple of months in the selection, but to open up the pool of viable solutions, because it is much shorter. It also smaller destinations, smaller venues, which don't have the capacity of large staff, can then compete in that environment, especially if there are indicators of flexibility. I think that definitely always helps.
One thing I wanted to add to Ksenija that we didn't talk about is rotation patterns and competition. I think that encouraging associations to when you're reviewing things, and this goes to criteria, since things are so different around the world, there isn't apples to apples, and this came up in many things. And I know, Erika, you probably could say this firsthand if you're trying to evaluate, but a lot of times if there is a regional rotation, I think that helps all of us in the RFQ really narrow in that this might be worth time, and it also helps the associations evaluate things more fairly versus a global rotation where things are so different. And so I would also encourage that as part of this RFQ, is really looking at where you want to go and why. And if we see that this is definitely a North America rotation, this is definitely Asia Pacific, this is definitely, EMEA, or I think that helps us narrow in on the legitimacy and ideally the bookability of the business.
And that goes back to the alignment of the mission. Has the board actually evaluated this is a region where we want to go intentionally? Because then the alignment is automatically much stronger. Tom.
I want to challenge associations too, because I have seen RFQs that essentially are almost like full RFPs, and they're just saying, "Oh, just give us 3 pages," but essentially they want to know everything. And I think that's completely doesn't fit the purpose. And again, the timelines for those are often very short, because they're supposed to only give you the high level things, right? Not tell us already what subventions we could get or whatever. I mean, that doesn't work.
I think, from my perspective, I'm just thinking maybe Tara, you and I would probably be on the same page. I'm sure Meg did too, but it's actually nice, even if an RFQ or an RFI is required, to see the full bidding requirements, because then we know what kind of subvention we might need to be getting together, how detailed the rest of the bidding procedure is. So we see the full requirements, but we know for the RFI or our expression of interest, we see, okay, that's due, 2 months from now, and it's a maximum of 3 pages, and it's at a high level, confirming that you have availability, that you have the amount of hotel rooms needed, et cetera. So we have a full picture going into it, and then that gives the board or venue selection or site selection committee the chance to look at all the potential interested countries or cities, and then potentially narrow it down to save some of us some time. So if collectively there's only 3 expressions of interest that come in, maybe all 3 will get invited to bid. But if there's 30, we'd rather probably, like, we know our chances are so slim and there's X amount of work involved that hopefully that board would narrow it down at that stage. So depending on where they're most interested in. So I think seeing the full picture, even at that initial stage, really helps, even if we're aware that it's just a 2-pager, kind of a short sort of letter of commitment to bid. That would really be good.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we are almost at the top of the hour, and we promise that we will come out with some commitments from each of us to leave the audience with. So I'm going to kick Erika off.
Great. My commitment is to help better educate the board and help it be more in line to what the expectations of staff and for me. And then I think one of the things that's been touched upon, and it cannot be stressed enough, I think, is the transparency of having that communication between the planner, the venues, the bureau, to make sure that also is in line.
Thank you. Tara?
I would say my commitment stays to recognize and share great examples. We have a lot of theory. So when we see people in associations or destinations doing things well in the RFP process, let's spend as much time sharing what works and what's going well versus talking about what doesn't. And if we share all of those best practices in real tangible ways, I think we can speed up this process to make it better.
Thank you. Stephanie?
I think for me, one of the things I think I can do better on is during the bidding phase to get on the call with the meeting planner or someone from the association to explain how our venue works and why having full transparency can unlock the best value for them.
Excellent. Magda?
I think I'll support Stephanie on that, but definitely work towards open discussion and conversations from the very beginning, and work towards being the kind of like a real contributor to the meeting and to its planning phase. Yeah.
Excellent. Tom?
Support Erika in what she said, and in addition to really educate associations on the importance of being much more partnership focused.
And I would have to concur that I think the role of PCOs could be really much stronger in bridging that gap and translating that alignment between mission and execution and providing that guidance there. And I'll commit to encourage all my peers who are PCOs to do that across the globe as well. Thank you so much. This was excellent. I hope you enjoyed that a lot. And I know that Sean needs a few seconds to highlight and close off.
Thank you very much, Ksenija, and thank you for all the speakers for very insightful and engaging sessions. On the screen, as you can see, we'd just like to encourage you to check out some of the upcoming webinars that ICCA has prepared for you. We have one in July 7 and 8, and then also end of July, there is another one. So welcome to check it out and register if that interesting you. Once again, thank you for taking the time and joining these sessions. And I wish you have a good evening, good morning for some of you, and have a rest of the good day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.